writers and book lovers. Miranda Darrow, freelance fiction editor here. In last week's video, we talked about the alt history subgenre of science fiction. Check out this video in my channel if this subgenre interests you, even if your interest is as a reader and not as a writer, but writers for sure. In this week's video, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite alt history novels that are not on the list of the most popular ones. I mentioned a bunch of popular alt history books in my discussion of the genre last week, but this week I'm diving into some of the lesser known stories. There are a lot of alt histories that reverse the results of major world events, like key assassinations and wars, looking at the big impacts, especially World War II. I'm going to focus on alt histories based on a pivot point that is lesser known historical events, or things that never happened, but maybe could have, or maybe they even thought about it, and how our world could have changed as a result. First up is American Hippo, the compendium title of two novellas, River of Teeth and The Taste of Marrow by Sarah Gailey. This is based on an obscure event that nearly happened. In 1910, when U.S. Representative Robert Broussard introduced the Hippo Bill, or House Rule 23-261 to Congress. In it, he proposed to import hippos from Africa and let them loose in Louisiana. The plan was that the hippos would eat the hyacinth that had polluted the swamp and become a new food source for hungry Americans. Gailey's universe has the swampy area, formerly known as the Mississippi River Valley, infested with hippos, and cowboys have learned to tame and ride them. It's wild, and the cover is amazing. The second recommendation is one that I just read called You Feel It Just Below the Ribs by Jeffrey Branner and Janina Matthewson. The pivot point is the influenza outbreak of the 1910s, which, combined with World War I, led to an event referred to as the Great Reckoning, in which all tribalism and nationalism and other loyalties were outlawed, including raising your own children. It's written as a memoir by a woman who lost her whole family, survived by her wits, and her refusal to make attachments with others. She developed a process of overwriting memories and setting up reprogramming facilities to break the relationships between parents and children. They even had an age 10 rule. You could raise them up until age 10, and then they would wipe their memories. There's some very interesting themes and results of this event that had happened, decades earlier in that novel. A third recommendation is both a novel and a movie, but they are very different. It's World War Z by Max Brooks. It's a zombie paranormal alt history dystopia. I would argue the novel version is alt history dystopian, whereas the movie was just a dystopia apocalypse. The novel was an epistolary story told in sections as diary entries and interviews with many different people with different perspectives of the war against the zombies. And it's divided into several time frames: immediately before the apocalypse, the start of the apocalypse, in the middle of the outbreak, the main siege, and the after effects. It's the focus on this one specific pivot point in history and then showing the changes resulting in the world over time that last for years afterward that would make this book, to me, alt history, as it covers the pivot point and the impact changing and echoing throughout the years. The movie was more of a singular narrative following Brad Pitt and a straight up dystopia, whereas the novel was a collage of many stories about the event. So as usual, the book was better. Max Brooks likes to write these type of found journal stories. I loved his paranormal Sasquatch dystopia Devolution, which isn't alt history, but is a lot of fun, especially for readers like me who just love Sasquatch. One of these weeks, I'll do a video of books just featuring Bigfoot. Next up, Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Slayer by Seth Grahame-Smith. The pivot point is very specifically Indiana in 1818. Moonlight falls through the dense wood that surround a one-room cabin where 9-year-old Abraham Lincoln kneels at his suffering mother's bedside. She'd been stricken by something the old-timers call milk sickness. Only later will the grieving Abe learn that his mother's fatal affliction was actually the work of vampires, prompting him on his lifelong quest to eradicate vampires and also slavery across the United States. This book is full of actual historical references and photographs along with the vampire twist. And it reads very much like nonfiction. Once again, this is another case where the book is alt history and the movie was more paranormal action. But there was so much history and research in this novel. If you haven't checked it out, you should. The fifth is one that I read in audiobook form with my husband while we were on a road trip to watch our son at ski meets. My husband is mostly interested in sci-fi and fantasy and really not in romantasy, so alt histories are usually a good choice. Machines Like Me by Ian McEwan is set in an alternate 1980s London, where in a world where Alan Turing was loved and supported as a hero from World War II, and he continued his work on computers, resulting in realistic IA robots in the 1980s and plenty of other technological advances that this world missed out on because of their homophobia and the horrible treatment to Turing. This is one that I referenced in last week's video as the opposite of steampunk, in which the world had technological advances way ahead of our world schedule. So in this 1980s London, but with more tech, and with the tech is more akin to 2020s. New robots are all the rage in a London that's still smarting from the Brits' recent devastating losses in the Falklands War, which in this alt history, the UK lost spectacularly, resulting in Margaret Thatcher's resignation. Our main character purchases one of the original 12 Atom model robots for personal amusement, hoping it would help him woo the woman upstairs, and not knowing that Atom would become a romantic rival for said woman upstairs. Oops! Next up is the truly trippy The Constant Rabbit by Jasper Fforde, the same author who gave us Thursday Next. This one is set in contemporary London, but after the spontaneous anthropomorphic event, an unexplained aligning of elements that resulted in walking, talking rabbits joining society, along with a few other small mammals. So everything is perfectly normal, except for the 6 feet tall talking rabbits who hold jobs and own houses, but they face discrimination just like anyone who isn't like everybody else around these parts. So it's an interesting look at immigration and discrimination. There was an event in which a bunch of rabbits became sentient. Number 7 has my favorite, overly specific and seemingly trivial pivot point. It's The Flight of the Silvers by Daniel Price, and it's set in an oddly nostalgic current USA that seems more like the 1950s. Entertainment and pop culture all suffered in this alt America because of decades ago, there was a protectionist cultural restriction that prevented George Lucas from seeing the movie The Seven Samurai. So Star Wars was never made. And now everything in entertainment is terribly boring. There's also a multiverse, and there's some minor details, but these are all minor compared to the loss of Star Wars. This one is part alt history, part multiverse, but I picked it because of the fun exploration of the changes to the US society and culture with the stagnation and getting stuck in 1950s style entertainment. And number 8 is a fantasy romp, When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. This one is one of my favorites because it has dragons. The pivot point was the Great Dragoning of 1955. Set years later, no one talks about the event where thousands of women spontaneously transformed into dragons, exploding notions of a woman's place in the world. Burn that patriarchy, beautiful dragons. I've recommended this book to coworkers and friends. I've also enjoyed thinking about a version of the United States that had resulted after the Great Dragoning of 1955. There you have it, 8 alt histories that don't show up on the list of the most popular ones, so you can read a bit deeper into this fun subgenre. Let me know if you have a recommendation that I should add to my list of to-be-read alt history books. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for new videos every week. If you're inspired by all the fun world building I research, check in next week for sure, because next week I'll have 10 tips for world building for any genre.